All right, and we're live once again.
Let's go.
Let's go. We're talking about Christ the King. We're talking about monarchy. You know, it's coming up, the Feast of Christ the King on the 30th. So let's get into it. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificerum nomen tuum, habendum regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra.
Panem nostrum quotidianum de nobis hodie, et dimitte nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen.
All right. Okay. So we'll just do a little brief reintroduction. I'm Adrian. I'm the Borichamo. Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
Hi, Adrian. I'm Christopher. Obviously, we know each other. We've been out a couple times. And I've got a little fact about myself that I'd like to share. Okay.
Sure.
I have this habit where I'll discover a teaching that, like a teaching of old, a teaching of the Catholic Church that's kind of, forgotten to modern ears. And just upon hearing it from a saint or something, I'll adopt the position before I can personally defend it. And the subject of today's conversation is one such subject where I was like totally on board before I really could even articulate why. And this is a little bit because like I knew St. Thomas Aquinas supported it. And even to this day, I have not read all the way through De Regno. I was cramming. I was trying to get through it, but we didn't make it all the way. But this is the thing I like to do is adopt positions before I can fully articulate them, just because they come from saints. And, I'm going to trust a saint over, some random, atheist or agnostic position of the day. So
there you go. Well, I mean, isn't that what faith is about? Just being able to believe even when we don't completely understand something.
This is true. I guess the thing that I need to be prudent about more so in my daily life is not, publicly announcing my belief in something before I'm able to explain why. I mean, I could just say like, I trust, St. Thomas Aquinas, but, I guess specifically, this might be a good place to start, but specifically when you propose monarchy as a legitimate form of government, that might be desirable. I think just in general, we have this idea that monarchy is bad. People say absolute power corrupts absolutely. And just to the modern ear, it's like, oh, like, no, we don't want a monarch. Like all the kings are tyrannical. Like that's not something we want. We have democracy now. We have a constitutional republic. We have the American founding fathers. They got things right. And we have this myth that we've created in our heads. But so anyway, there's this idea that, monarchy's something from the past. It's a relic. We don't need it anymore. We have a better solution. And St. Thomas Aquinas would say otherwise. And
he's a heavy hitter. This is not just Joe Schmo.
This is true. I think. So anyway, the first question that people always have is like, what do you do when you have a bad king? And I think we should sideline this just for a little bit before we,
this is a cliffhanger. You just got tease.
I know he kind of like led us into this, and I think that might have been a mistake. Just like my initial zealousness before I was able to defend my position. But anyway, let's go through, Adrian. Let's go through the 6 forms of government discussed by St. Thomas Aquinas. And by the way, this is what we're referencing. De Regno. It's a letter to the King of Cyprus from St. Thomas Aquinas, in which he expounds upon the virtues of a good king and the different forms of government, and the reasons for each of them.
Yeah, de Regno being Latin for on kingship, I would assume.
Yes, or of kingship, maybe. I don't know. In Spanish, de is of, but it could be on. I don't know. It's about kingship. That's the important thing. So anyway, I think probably a good place to begin is St. Thomas Aquinas explains the importance of humans living in society or in common with each other. So you could try to live like all on your own, but ultimately we are designed for community. We know that man and woman, like the natural course of a man's life is to marry a woman. Obviously, some people have a supernatural calling to a vocation or to celibacy. But the natural calling is to marriage. So we are designed for community. And even if you are called to, priesthood or religious life, that's still in a sense community. It's not like you're completely on your own. And even people who might just like live like very solitary lives, there's still community as part of that. They were raised in a family. They were at least born to a woman. So they have some connection to humanity in their lives. And presumably most people in the modern day, everyone knows how to speak. Maybe not right, depending on where you live. But the point is that everyone has to live in community. And as part of this, we have every human, since we're an individual, we have different goals and different things that are good for us. And St. Thomas Aquinas would call goals which are good to an individual the private good. So you and I both have things that we want in our lives, things that, could be totally good and totally worth pursuing, but they might be individual to you and to me. So those are just private goods. It's not something that necessarily applies to everyone. But there are things that apply.
Are these things like subjective, like they're arbitrary?
Yeah, I mean, think of things that might be economically good for you, or like different career goals that you might have, stuff like that. And there are some private goods which are in competition with each other. But one thing that exists across all of a society or all of a family or all of a given social unit is the common good, and these are things that are necessary for everyone to be able to pursue their private goods. And St. Thomas Aquinas tells us that since it is necessary for the common good to have the private good, then the common good is more important than the private good. And therefore, since we have contending private goods, we need to have some sort of framework, some sort of guiding principle that orients us towards the common good. And he talks about how, in the body, we have the heart. In the soul, we have reason. He talks about, I think, a bee colony, and he references a king bee. I think.
Oh, the bee colony.
Yes.
I'm all about bees.
And
there is I think St. Ambrose was the one who compared the church to a beehive. He said the bees are naturally monarchical.
Well, this is the same example that St. Thomas Aquinas brings up.
Beautiful.
I
jumped the gun.
The common theme here. And the point that St. Thomas brings up is that in all of these different natural systems, there is a unified headship over all of them. In the soul, it's reason. In the body, it's the heart, or maybe today we'd say the brain. And then in the bee colony, he says the king bee, maybe we would say the queen bee. But ultimately, the point remains that there is a unified point of headship. And St. Thomas Aquinas says that that which is artificial is judged on how much it assimilates to what is natural. So, for example, if there's a painting, we judge a painting by its how well it conveys that which is real, and like how well does the painting accurately depict what is truly there. So, therefore, something that might be more artificial, like the way we decide to construct our society, would be better to model it after that which is naturally occurring, which, as we see in all these examples, is a unified headship. So, anyway. I guess not. So St. Thomas Aquinas discusses the government kind of on two axes, like if you can imagine a graph. And one axis is the virtue or the vice of the government, or maybe I should do it this way. So the
left.
Yeah. See, I'm like, wait, I'm not being mirrored on my screen right now, so it's kind of confusing. Okay, so the vice on the left, the virtue on the right. Okay, I like that. And then also like the degree to which there's unity in the government. So he proposes three different amounts of unity, and then also like the vicious kind and the virtuous kind. All right. So obviously he proposes monarchy as the units united because it's one, and there's no like competing goal. Like the king or the monarch is able to pursue the common good. On the other side, we have tyranny. So the virtuous is the king, the monarch. The vicious is the tyrant. Then a little bit less unified, we have the virtuous, which would be an aristocracy, and the vicious, which would be an oligarchy. And then on like the least unified, the most just kind of all over the place would be on the good side, we have polity is the word he uses. And on the bad side, we have democracy. Now, I'm going to say something. To be fair, the translation I was using, there might be other ways to translate the words from Latin because this letter does come from Latin. But I think it's incredibly ironic because we see, especially like liberals today, they're all about saving our democracy. It's hilarious because the good thing would actually be polity if they are, trying to, maintain that disparate form of social control instead of a concentrated and unified one. So when people say we need to save our democracy, St. Thomas Aquinas literally says that democracy is the vicious equivalent to polity, which would be sort of a united good, like for the common good, democratic system. I thought that was a little bit funny, to say the least.
The allegiance must be to polity.
Yes.
Yes. To the republic.
So exactly. So yeah, these are the different forms of government which St. Thomas Aquinas proposes. And I guess a common thing people might say is, well, we can't trust that the king will be good, so therefore we'll want to, choose the least unified because. So St. Thomas Aquinas, I'm kind of going all over the place a little bit here. So if I'm confusing you, if you have any questions, then feel free to jump in. But St. Thomas Aquinas says that if you have a goal, then if you're unified, you'll be more likely to be able to achieve that goal. So the idea being that if you have just, a monarch, he has one will. There is no competing will. It's not a multitude of wills. It's one will. And therefore unity is easiest. He also says that like, if you're trying
it's visible, there's a visible head, right?
Yes.
Whereas with oligarchy, it's more nebulous. It's more misty. So
let me take it one step back too. St. Thomas Aquinas says that the goal of a government is to maintain unity and peace. Okay. So he also says that which is itself in unity is more capable of making that which is around it in unity. Kind of like something which is hot is more capable of making the things around it warm, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the monarch with a united will, because it's one will, is more capable of making a united people. Then in aristocracy, since there are multiple wills that are more dispersed, it's less capable than the monarchy of maintaining unity. That being said, it can still be virtuous. You can have virtuous aristocrats, but it won't be quite as unified as if you have a king.
Well, that's fascinating to me because it's so commonsensical, right? That we imitate even subconsciously like what we see, right? And it kind of reminds me of like the idea of how virtue and or sin, right, will affect the people around you. If you're virtuous, other people around you will be affected by that virtue, and if you're vicious, then people will become more vicious around you. And there's like that reality too, right, to it. So that's incredible. Please go on. That's good.
I think to your point though, I think there's also just like a natural desire for monarchy. I don't know if you felt this way, but as a little kid, like if I were like playing make believe or something, like I never made believe as president. I never made believe as a senator. I was always like, I want to either be a king or someone serving the king, right? Am I alone in this? Like, I wanted to like marry the princess and like slay dragon to marry the princess or whatever. Like that was my make believe.
That's what most fiction, kind of emulates, right? So many movies, so many games will appeal to that want, that desire, right? To be like the king or the rescuer or whatever like that. That's what Mario is or whatever. It's like a lot of this stuff.
I was just thinking of that.
Yeah, with Bowser. Yeah, it's true.
So no, you're absolutely right. I think there is sort of a natural. We have rationalized our way to our modern forms of government. We haven't. It's not. It hasn't just like. It's not like a natural thing. We've taken the artificial thing and made it more artificial and less imitating of the natural.
Or even historically, right? The oldest surviving song, right, is the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh was like a king, right? He was like this like god king myth thing, and so it's it goes to the very root. That goes to the very core of humanity's wants, and humanity's mythos of itself and of its creation, right? And that's I think there's something very primordial about it.
Well, this is true, and it's also, it's also imitating our supernatural realities. Like, when we say the Our Father, it is Thy kingdom come, because heaven is a kingdom, and that is what we are aspiring to in eternal life, is to be part of that kingdom. So yeah, it really is a natural thing that we have rationalized our way out of. Anyway, to bring this back, I was talking about like how there's less unity with monarchy, less unity with aristocracy, and even less unity with democracy. So some people might say, well, if you can't trust whether you'll have a virtuous or a vicious government, you might as well choose democracy, because if it's oriented towards vice, I was doing this side. If it's oriented towards vice, then the less united way will be less capable of obtaining said vice. So some people like to think that that's sort of like a hedge against it. And I think that might be a fair argument if you have no belief in the supernatural. But, and I think Father Ripperger has said this, but there's this idea that we get the government we deserve. And, I think it might be okay to have a little bit more faith that, with prayer and fasting and living virtuous, good, holy, godly lives, leading good, holy, godly families. If you're a priest, leading a godly congregation at your parish, I think it's okay to assume that we can expect, God to defend us. Obviously, like, there's a story of Job, and like, just because you're virtuous doesn't mean good things will happen necessarily. But I think by and large, it's true that we do get the government we deserve, and I think we have a little bit of faith in that. An example comes to mind: Saint Fabian. Do you know about Saint Fabian?
I do not.
Okay, this is sweet. So Saint Fabian was a pope, and a pretty early pope. I don't remember which year, but the pope before him had just died. So he was coming to, I believe, Rome to mourn the loss of the previous pope and see who would be selected as the new pope. He was a farmer. Like, he was not a priest or a bishop or anything. He was literally a farmer. And when he got to Rome, a dove descended on him. And that was how he was selected to become the next pope. And he's a saint now. So I think there really is an element of supernatural that we just...
And he was a layman?
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I looked them up. He lived in the 200s.
Yeah.
And that's the famous story of the layman who was elected pope.
This is true. So anyway, yeah, supernatural things do happen, and we like to naturalize everything. And I think that might be a little bit of a mistake. So anyway, okay, have I left any unfinished threads at this point? I feel like I have, but I don't remember.
Well, you've been talking about the excesses and the defects, and all these things, like the ideal and the bad, I guess, version of either tyranny, monarchy, oligarchy, polity, all these different things. That's kind of where you were leaving off there. But I also kind of what I was getting at before, right? Because as you're doing the left and the right thing. What was I referencing there? I was referencing, the French Revolution, right? Because, when the people were trying to choose, right? The two parties really were trying to choose really who, what form of government they would have right after the French Revolution. On the left, you had the liberals, right? In this true form, right? The original liberals who wanted to get rid of the monarchy. That's why. The left, I was like, oh, the left would be the poor version, right? Because that's precisely what they were trying to do. That's the original left. That's where we get the terms left and right and liberal conservative, right? Because the conservatives at the time wanted to continue the French monarchy, and liberals wanted to abolish it. And obviously, we know how that ended. Interestingly, why I mentioned it, because the revolutionaries get their end, right? They destroy the monarchy. But then what happens? it becomes a reign of terror. You know, it becomes this. It devolves into a huge mess. It revolves into beheadings, into complete attacks on the church, into the cult of reason. Right, Notre Dame was sort of bastardized, and they had the naked woman in Notre Dame, and that was like that was reason incarnate, right? Instead of having Christ be the king of France, you know, Our Lady Notre Dame, right, be the queen of France. It was all about reason. It was all about the revolution, and eventually, the person who became the most staunch revolutionary, you know, Napoleon Bonaparte, he himself, you know, became emperor. He himself became a monarch, and so it's this irony, you know, of the French Revolution in trying to pursue these ideals, these revolutionary ideals. Napoleon just becomes the same thing that he was against in the beginning, and so it's just this sort of ridiculous parody that we see in history, and so it's that personification of these concepts that are being espoused by St. Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It definitely is. You know, there is a longing for it. We see the Israelites; they wanted a king. Actually, this is a good point. There was people will often comment like the Israelites wanted a king, and God warned them against it. All right, and this is an argument that I perhaps should be a little bit less zealous about. So to be fair, I haven't done a ton of research into this question, so it might be worth doing a little bit more research. But the Israelites wanted a king, and God warns them about the king.
Like an earthly king, earthly king.
Now,
to clarify,
the problem with the Israelites asking for a king is not that they asked for a king. It's that they asked for a king before they were prepared for it. Essentially not trusting God's providence. Because I think they had to wait one more generation before they were supposed to have a king. So anyway, the critique of the Israelites is not that they asked for a king. The critique of the Israelites would be that they did it kind of out of God's order. And that kind of, I guess, to me makes sense, because if heaven is like, if God were against kings, then heaven wouldn't be a monarchy. Like that seems kind of counterintuitive. So anyway, I guess that's kind of a thing people bring up, is like the Israelites, you know, they asked for a king and God said no, but then yes. So,
well, I mean, the ultimate irony of that is that, you know, we have to clarify, right? We have to clarify, because the ultimate irony of this is that there is a king to the universe, and his name is Christ. We got an Ola from Texas. Hello, Texas. Welcome. We're talking about monarchy. We're talking about kingship. But yeah, so the ultimate, you know, Christ is king. You know, Jesus is king, and you know, as people from Texas, as people from Mexico, you know, may be familiar with the term, you know, Cristo Rey, you know, because it's que viva. True, it's real, and the monarchy is real. It's the ordering of the universe, and that's why, you know, if you try and imitate the ordering of the universe, you're going to find that things are more harmonious. Things just work in a better way, you know, in a way that's more fair, in a way that's ultimately going to be more beneficial for everybody and everything. And that's, you know, that's why, you know, we know that these things are, you know, mystical and spiritual realities. And that's why, you know, when the Israelites were asking for a king, they were asking for the wrong type, you know, because they were expecting that they were going to be, you know, in that same generation, be liberated by the, you know, from the Romans by this conqueror. But the kingship, the reign that was being offered, you know, by Christ was of not an earthly kingdom, but of a heavenly one. So that's why, you know, the church itself is also like the beehive, right? It's ordered like a monarchy. That's why the Pope is a monarch, because ultimately it's trying to, on earth, imitate that mystical reality, that spiritual reality of Christ. And ultimately, as well, every king, has queen, that would be Mary, the mother of God, the Blessed Virgin. As we know in the Old Testament, right, and just in the old ancient Israelite, tradition, the mother of the king would be the queen, not necessarily the wife, in that sense. And so these are things that are just important to note. These are things important to state, because ultimately that's where we can find rest, and we can find, our spiritual lives make sense when we can have. That's why he's called our Lord. That's why she's called Our Lady, right? Because these are ultimately just terms that were used, by the medievals to refer to their lords and their ladies being their kings and their queens and their landed gentry of the time. And so that's why it's really beautiful that we use these terms, right? Because it's fascinating. Because I was just when you look at stuff online and stuff like that, and there's like this post about how like the medieval peasant like had like more
freedom than we do today.
More freedom, exactly. Yeah, they had more vacation days and stuff like that. Because that's what holidays are. They're holy days of obligation. They're holy feast days. That's where we get these terms. That's where we get all these things that today in our modern world have lost their meaning. But that's where these things ultimately came from. They came from medieval Christendom, and medieval Christendom was that personification of kingship, right? And a rightly ordered kingship. And then ultimately, right, once in the 1500s, once the Protestant revolt and stuff like that happens, right, you see sort of the fracturing of medieval Christendom, and you see sort of the burgeoning and flowering, golden age of in the Baroque period of the Hispanic world and South American sort of, Christendom, if you will. That world of Hispanidad, ultimately, had one monarch at the time, and you would see a lot of cooperation. You would see a lot of success. You would see a lot of financial success. A lot of universities. It's fascinating because you had more universities in South America than you had in North America in those times, and earlier as well. So you see the sort of the fruits of monarchy, and we see sort of in the last, since like World War I is really when you lost the monarchies, right, in Europe, and so we see the fruits of that. We see the fruits of that in these countries in particular. The beginnings of the anti-monarchism, were the French Revolution, the American Revolution, all these different sort of Masonic things, right, that we already are familiar with. But when you see it being lost in the place where it was so integral to its society, you see the ramifications of it culturally, spiritually, even economically.
Yeah, there's this. What does Satan say in the fall? He says, "Non serviam, I will not serve." And part of the Protestant Revolution was this rejection of authority, both within the church and from without the church. And ultimately, like, God ordains authority. Like, authority is a good thing. It is abused authority that's a bad thing. But this is actually an important point. Is like, just because something might seem unreasonable, like if something good seems unreasonable, that doesn't make it not good. And I think this comes up a lot in conversations with people. And like, so for example, with the monarchy question, like, to our modern brains, it might be like, okay, this is like, there's no way we could possibly have a good king, so we might as well settle for democracy. Well, just because we think that like this might be an impossibility or something, doesn't mean that monarchy isn't good. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Another thing too, with like the idea of like I don't want to we have this idea that like democracy is better because like everyone kind of gets a say, and like I don't have to subject my will to anyone else's will, and that there's this idea of equality. And ultimately, I think that's a misguided way of understanding the world. And Saint Therese of Lisieux has a really beautiful way of describing this reality. But like, and then this also is true. Like, if you look at the parable of the talents, like, we're not all endowed equally with like the same gifts, and people are designed for different purposes. And Saint Therese of Lisieux talks about how,
and that's okay. Like,
yes,
just for anybody who, that's okay. We're different, and that's part of being created. You have different destinies, and that's
yeah,
not the end of the world.
no, absolutely. So Saint Therese's image for this is that the kingdom of heaven is like a garden with all these different kinds of flowers. And if we all were bestowed with the same gifts, and we were all essentially like the same flower, that would be a much more boring garden than if there were a garden in which there were different flowers, and people were being whichever flower they were called to be to the best of their ability. So essentially, like you said, Adrian, like it's fine if not everyone's called to be a king, because not everyone is called to be a king. And like, God has called you to be something, and the best thing you can do is be that thing to the best of your ability, not be whatever you want to be to the best of your ability. And I think that's another thing too, is like, especially with like a lot of secular motivational speakers, it's like, if you just put in hard work, then you can achieve whatever you want to achieve. And God doesn't call you to be whatever you want to be. God calls you what he wants you to be. And we like instinctively, like with our modern minds, feel like that's a limitation of freedom, but it's actually a greater freedom, because like freedom
it's like it's giving you a purpose.
Yes,
it's giving you a purpose, like, and that gives you a mission, and that I think is incredible. I think that's a gift. When you have a mission, you have something to do, you have a purpose for your life, right? Because that's so many people feel like they don't have any purpose for their lives, right? And that's why so many people are just going so crazy. It's just so sad nowadays.
As an aside, I think this might be, just as you were talking about this, it seems like it might be a symptom of social media, because I think social media has this tendency to make us all kind of want to be the same person. Like, we all want to like have the beautiful Instagram that like, everyone wants to like look the same way. And this isn't like strictly true necessarily. Obviously there are like, different like stylistic trends and whatnot, but broadly speaking, like, everyone kind of wants to appear the same way to everyone else. Everyone wants to appear, wealthy in the same way. I think there's this thing where like everyone kind of wants to pursue the same like more and more like common careers, which I think all of this like sort of like loss of, we like really prioritize the individual in terms of like the libertarian sense, like the libertarian like don't tread on me sense, and like don't say what I can and what I can't do. But on the other hand, like, we've completely lost all sense of individuality in our personalities, and in the way we adorn ourselves. This is also, I guess, corresponds with the loss of cultures too, as kind of everyone sort of descends to like the lowest common denominator of how we live our lives. Which, okay, I'm just going to keep rambling here, but I think
please do. It's good. I like the way you're. I like what you're saying. Yeah,
I think that's also a feature of democracy, because with democracy, and I think this is very clearly the case in the United States. Technically, constitutional republic, okay, yes, but like the idea is people are voting for the government that they want. And in the United States, we see this where like first it was just like the vice that people wanted was just no fault divorce, and like, we're just gonna have no fault divorce, and that's gonna be it. We're gonna stop there. But it didn't stop there, because as you know, then abortion became legal with Roe v. Wade, and then we saw the implementation of legitimized homosexuality, and now we see the legitimization of transsexuality. None of these are legitimate things, but it's like everyone always has like their vice, and you want to legalize your vice, but none of the other vices. But if you have this sort of libertarian sense of like, don't tread on me, and like, morality cannot be legislated. That's what people like to, you can't legislate my morality. Then what happens in society is you add progressively more and more vices until your society is just, everyone is participating in a vice, and everyone's self-righteous because, of course, everyone else's vice is worse than my vice, right? And I think that's something we're all guilty of, and I think it's highlighted as a I guess a bug in in democracy, or constitutional republic. So anyway, yeah, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add. That just kind of like came to mind, and I just wanted to run with it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? The sort of the hive mind phenomenon that occurs today. Okay, we got gracias por el tema. Thank you for the topic from Medium Castillo. Hello. I think today we have quite the hive mind on social media and stuff like that, and it is like it is fascinating, right? Because it's like people want to be like a part of something. People want to like belong to something, and I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily because of the form of government. I just think people just generally want to fit in. Because people want to be wanted.
People do want to be a part of something. This is absolutely the case. I mean, I'm playing it up a little bit. Like, it's not like the only reason there's vice is democracy. Like, there are clearly other reasons why people choose a vice. But yes, no, you're absolutely right. People want a sense of belonging, and we're all, like we said at the beginning, like, we're called to community. This is part of our human nature.
It is. It's true. I think ultimately, just having rightly ordered, having things rightly ordered is the most important thing, and I think the most important thing is just starting at the very basics. Because I always think of that image from like the Baltimore Catechism, whereas everyone carrying their cross, and it starts from like like little girl, little boy, and then it goes up, mother, father, it's got all the way up to priest, pope, and then it has Mary, Jesus, right? It has everybody in a rightly ordered way, because ultimately you need to have good leadership needs to start small so that it can be big, right? Because ultimately, like, you can't get to the point where you have a rightly ordered government if the people are not rightly ordered themselves. People need to be virtuous, and people need to be going into a form of leadership that is just rightly ordered, right? And you need to have strong headship. You need to have strong headship from a husband. You need to have that from the priest, right? And then ultimately the clergy, right? You need to have that strong headship so that you can have a rightly ordered monarch or whomever, right? And that's really something that, like, on a very practical level, right? You just need to, these things compound, right? If you are trying to learn to virtue, trying to learn how to abstain from mortal sin, ultimately you're going to be on a right path. And that's the most important sort of thing to take away from it, right? Because you need to start conquering yourself. You need to be the king of your own domain, ultimately, right? Because if you can't control that, you can't be any sort of leader for anybody, because that's why you'd see all these monarchs, right? They would train from birth, basically, in manners, virtue, all this stuff, right? King Louis the Ninth, a saint, right? I think of him, and his mom said, I'd rather you die than commit a mortal sin. This is like, oh my goodness, that's intense. But he was a very, a saint, right? He's a canonized saint. Ultimately, he was a virtuous guy, right? And
when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so hardcore, but also so awesome. Like,
yeah, it's true.
What a great woman to raise her son like that.
And that's just exactly, that's how it starts, right? She was doing her job as a mother, and then ultimately he became a great monarch, right? Because that's really how these things need to start. That's how these things need to begin. They need to start somewhere. I think of every single blessed or servant of God, or any sort of leader who has any sort of a virtue, had to start from from the when they were there. They were very young, and you think of even just like very recently, like you have like Blessed Karl of Austria, right? He was the last of the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, right? He was he was like the last, right? The last of a dying breed, really. But he was he ultimately wanted to have a very virtuous marriage, right? And that's really what he wanted to do. You also have Saint Ferdinand III, very successful warrior, in battle. But ultimately, you can't do any of these things without Christ. You can't do any of this stuff without God. And that's so you need to start doing what you can now, so you can be capable of doing something tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we definitely need good kings. And to bring this back to the beginning, I left us on a cliffhanger. What do you do if there's a bad king? And I'm not going to go super into it right now because I can't make quite the same argument that I'm as Christendom, which is one of my favorite YouTube channels, makes. But I'm going to send you the link, Adrian. I want you to link a video below because I think this guy makes a very good like explanation of like what do we do when there's a bad king, which I think is I'm not going to try to explain it because he's much more articulate than I. And then the last thing about that too is like to bring it like a secular influence. I've been listening to with one of my friends. I've been listening to Jocko Willink's. I think it's called Extreme Ownership. And one of the concepts he talks about is like leading both up and down the chain. And I think there is some legitimacy to that as well. Again, I'm not going to elaborate on that because I'm not quite as articulated about that subject as I'd like to be. But I think there are ways to alleviate the possibility of a bad king. And don't let that question be the one thing that prevents you from looking further into the subject of monarchy, because, as we've talked about tonight, there are a lot of like compelling reasons for it. Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure I kind of closed off that thread before we call it a night. I don't know if there's anything else that comes to mind, but
yeah. I mean, when it comes to this stuff, it's we just need to be trying to learn what we can, right? And just trying to apply the small things that we can to our daily lives. I wanted to talk about it precisely because we're coming up on the feast of Christ the King, and that feast was actually introduced after World War One because people did not have the immediate sort of proximity to that concept in real life anymore. You had the loss of quite many monarchs around the world, and so that was actually introduced to remind people of the importance of that. And that's really one of the most important things to remember is, Christ needs to be the king of your life, of the public life, and then he is also king of the universe, right? He is king over all. And so that's really the most important thing to take away from it. And ultimately, yeah, just try and work on that virtue in yourself, because that's really the way that you can start to change things, not only for yourself, but the people around you in a practical and also a spiritual way.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So should we close up? Viva Cristo Rey, que viva. All right. Let's end off with Ave.
All right. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Santa Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc in hora mortis nostri. Amen.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Awesome. Thank you all for watching. This is a fun episode. I like this one a lot.
Oh yeah, this one was high energy. Love it. All right, everybody. Take care. Have a good night.